Hi, I'm Linda. For months, my neighbor Mark treated my silence as weakness while his tree was slowly destroying my home. He looked me in the eye and laughed, confident that a quiet, retired school teacher could never stop him. What Mark didn't realize was that he had already made one small, mundane mistake right on his own front porch, a single signature that quietly sealed his financial fate before he even knew a battle had begun. If you enjoy stories where calm patience completely turns the tables, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. And before we dive in, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from today? And what time is it on your clock right now? When I retired after 32 years of teaching high school English in Ohio, I bought my dream home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I spent decades saving every penny from my teacher's salary to secure this house. It was a classic 2-story colonial with a neatly manicured lawn, a concrete driveway, and a solid brick basement foundation. To me, this place represented 30 years of early mornings, lesson plans, and hard work. It was my sanctuary, a place where I planned to spend my golden years in absolute peace and comfort. For the first 3 years, my retirement was everything I had hoped it would be. I spent my mornings tending to my garden, reading on the front porch, and enjoying the quiet charm of the neighborhood. The local community was friendly, the streets were quiet, and everyone respected each other's personal space and property boundaries. But everything changed early last spring when the house next door was sold to a man named Mark. Mark was in his late 30s, arrogant and constantly eager to project an aura of total authority. From the moment he moved in, he made it clear that he had zero interest in being a good neighbor. He rarely acknowledged anyone on the street, drove his truck over the lawn, and treated the neighborhood like his personal playground. I tried to stay out of his way and maintain a polite distance, preferring to focus on my own property and peace of mind. Then came the Tuesday afternoon that started it all.
I was sitting on my back patio when a commercial landscaping truck pulled into Mark's driveway. 2 workers unloaded a young tree from the back of the flatbed. It had long, drooping green branches and a root ball wrapped in burlap. I immediately recognized the species, a Salix babylonica, commonly known as a weeping willow. As I watched from my yard, the workers began digging a massive hole less than 3 feet from the property line separating our 2 lots. My heart sank. Anyone with basic knowledge of botany or property management knows that planting a weeping willow in a residential suburban yard is a recipe for disaster. Weeping willows have exceptionally aggressive, invasive root systems that seek out water sources relentlessly. Their roots can extend up to 40 feet from the trunk, crushing underground plumbing pipes, lifting concrete driveways, and cracking house foundations with relentless force. I set my coffee cup down, walked calmly across my lawn, and approached Mark, who was standing near the edge of his driveway supervising the workers. "Hi, Mark," I said, keeping my tone polite, direct, and completely calm. "I notice you're planting a weeping willow right here." "Yeah," he replied without looking at me, checking his phone. "It gives the yard a nice natural look." "I understand," I said. "Pathways and shade are great, but that's a weeping willow. Their roots are notoriously aggressive and travel immense distances searching for water underground."
Planting it barely 3 feet from the property line means those roots are going to grow straight toward my underground water pipes and foundation. Mark finally lowered his phone, looked at me with a smirk, and crossed his arms. "Linda, it's my property, and I can plant whatever tree I want on it. Nature has a way of working itself out, so you don't need to tell me how to manage my yard." "Mark, I'm giving you a friendly heads up," I responded firmly. "A tree like that needs at least 50 feet of open space away from any structures or underground utilities. If those roots cross the boundary line and cause structural damage, it's going to become a severe legal and financial headache for both of us." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "I think you're overreacting. It's just a tree. Relax and let it grow." I looked him straight in the eyes, realizing instantly that rational conversation was useless. "All right, Mark, I gave you fair warning." I turned around and walked back to my porch. Behind me, the landscaping crew lowered the weeping willow into the ground and packed the dirt firmly around its roots. Mark thought he had won a small victory over his retired neighbor. He didn't realize that by ignoring my warning, he had just planted a time bomb on his own property line, and I was going to make sure every single detail was recorded. 3 years passed quickly. The weeping willow thrived, turning from a small sapling into a massive, sprawling monster. Its canopy shaded half of Mark's front lawn, but underground, its aggressive roots were waging an invisible war against my property. I knew the signs were coming, and I kept a watchful eye on every inch of my home, documenting every small change. The first sign appeared along my side walkway during early summer. A thick concrete slab began to tilt and buckle, creating a sharp 2-inch ridge that posed a tripping hazard. When I cleared away the dirt along the edge, a web of thick, pale tree roots was visibly pushing straight up against the hard surface. A month later, the water pressure in my kitchen sink dropped significantly. Every time I turned on the faucet, a strange grinding sound echoed from deep within the plumbing system. I called a local plumber to run a scope camera down the main clean water pipe. The video monitor clearly showed fine, thread-like root tendrils forcing their way through the pipe joints, greedily feeding on the water flow inside. The most alarming damage presented itself a few weeks later. I went down to my basement to organize my storage shelves and noticed hairline cracks running diagonally along the concrete foundation wall, the exact wall facing Mark's property. Fine brown dirt was beginning to seep through the fractured mortar, and a faint, damp odor filled the air. The willow's root network had reached my house. The expanding roots were applying tremendous, constant pressure against the underground masonry. What had started as an ignored warning was now actively threatening the structural safety of my entire home, the single biggest financial asset I owned. I refused to let emotion dictate my actions. Instead of panicking or starting a screaming match, I focused on taking practical, measurable steps. I called a licensed local contractor to conduct a preliminary inspection and provide an itemized repair estimate for the damaged sidewalk and basic pipe clearing. The total came out to $3,500. I printed out the estimate, attached high-resolution photographs of the buckled concrete, and included the camera stills of the root-clogged plumbing. I placed everything inside a neat paper folder. The next evening, I saw Mark standing in his driveway, washing his pickup truck. I walked over with the folder held firmly in my hand. "Mark, we need to address your weeping willow," I said, offering him the folder. "Its root system has buckled my walkway, broken into my main water line, and started cracking my basement wall. Here are the contractor's photos and the initial repair estimate." Mark barely glanced at the paperwork before handing it back to me, an arrogant smirk spreading across his face. "Linda, you can't prove those roots come from my tree. There are plants everywhere." "It is the only tree within 60 feet of my foundation, Mark," I replied, keeping my voice firm and quiet. "The root direction is undeniable." "I need you to hire a certified professional to remove the tree or install a root barrier, and we need to resolve these repair expenses." He wiped his hands on a towel, crossed his arms, and adopted a dismissive, patronizing tone. "Listen to yourself, Linda. That tree is a living creature, and it has a right to grow. You can't destroy nature just because your old concrete has a few cracks. You need to adapt and learn to live in harmony with nature." I reclaimed my folder and looked him dead in the eyes. I didn't yell, and I didn't plead. His passive-aggressive response gave me all the clarity I needed. Mark assumed I was just a fragile, helpless retired teacher who would quietly suffer and pay for his tree's destruction. He didn't realize that his arrogant refusal had just officially opened the door for a methodical, devastating response. Walking back to my porch after Mark's condescending lecture, I felt remarkably calm. He thought I was going to cry, complain, or engage in petty suburban shouting matches. He mistook my polite demeanor for weakness. I didn't lose my temper or make empty threats. Instead of wasting another breath arguing with him, I drove straight to a local legal practice specializing in real estate and property disputes. My attorney, a veteran trial lawyer named Richard, reviewed my notes and laid out the strategy. Linda, in property law, emotions don't mean anything in court, Richard explained, leaning across his desk. Only cold, hard, certified facts win cases. If you want to hold him fully liable for every single penny of damage, you need an ironclad paper trail that proves absolute causation. You need 3 separate, unassailable experts whose professional licenses carry weight. I followed Richard's instructions down to the last detail, treating the entire process like a tactical operation. I wasn't interested in a compromise anymore. I was building a case that would stand up in any court in the state. The very next morning, the investigations began on my property. First, I hired an ISA-certified master arborist. He spent 3 hours measuring the trunk caliper, mapping the root canopy, and taking soil core samples along the property line. He brought a ground-penetrating radar unit that visually mapped the subterranean root distribution beneath my lawn. His technical report was devastatingly clear. The radar scans vividly depicted massive root tendrils extending 25 feet directly into my lot, right beneath my driveway and straight toward my basement. He noted in his official report that the tree's age, aggressive growth rate, and proximity to my home made it the sole source of the subterranean pressure. Second, I brought in a master licensed plumber equipped with industrial high-definition fiber optic cameras and root-cutting augers. He ran the camera straight down my main cleanout line, recording 45 minutes of high-resolution video footage. The video clearly captured thick, fibrous root tendrils bursting through the PVC pipe seams. To leave zero doubt in a legal setting, the plumber cut out a 6-inch section of the intruding root mass, sealed it in a sterile specimen bag, and submitted it to the State University's Agricultural Extension Lab for botanical analysis. 3 days later, the certified lab report came back with a 99.8% DNA match, Salix babylonica, a weeping willow. Third, I hired a senior structural engineer to evaluate the foundation damage in my basement. He brought laser leveling devices, moisture meters, and digital crack monitoring gauges. He spent hours measuring the wall displacement and calculating the lateral earth pressure exerted by the expanding root system against the concrete blocks. This wall is bowing inward under continuous physical force, the engineer told me as he logged his measurements. His final written assessment concluded that my basement wall was experiencing severe structural distress, directly caused by external root expansion, rendering the structure compromised if left unaddressed. Over the next 2 weeks, the expert reports arrived in my mailbox one by one. Each document was printed on official letterhead, stamped with state professional seals, and signed under oath. I compiled them into a thick 3-ring binder, organized with color-coded tabs: arborist report, botanical lab verification, plumbing camera logs, and engineering structural analysis. Total out-of-pocket expenses for these inspections reached nearly $3,000, but every penny was a calculated investment. Together, these documents created an airtight, undeniable chain of evidence. There was no ambiguity, no guesswork, and no room for alternate explanations. Every document was backed by state certifications. When you play the long game, you don't leave anything to chance. Mark thought he was dealing with an overly sensitive elderly neighbor who made baseless complaints. He had no idea I had just assembled a bulletproof legal portfolio that established 100% liability on his part. I placed the binder neatly on my desk, ready to execute the next phase of the plan. With the thick binder of expert reports resting on my desk, I returned to Richard's office to outline our next move. I was ready to file a formal lawsuit immediately, but my attorney held up his hand, shaking his head with a cool, practiced smile. "Patience, Linda," Richard said, leaning back in his leather chair. "A direct lawsuit right now gives him room to maneuver, make excuses, or claim surprise. We don't just want to win a judgment in court. We want to eliminate every single legal escape route he has. Before we touch a courthouse, we need to hand him the rope that seals his own fate." Richard drafted a comprehensive document titled Formal Notice of Property Damage and Demand for Structural Remediation. Attached to this notice were copies of all 3 expert reports, the plumbing video logs, the university lab DNA analysis, and itemized contractor estimates. The total estimate for foundation repair, main water line replacement, sidewalk repaving, and mandatory tree removal came to $45,000. The notice was explicit. It stated that Mark's weeping willow was causing active, continuous damage to my real property. It demanded full remediation within 30 days and formally notified him that failure to act constituted intentional negligence under state property law. "Now," Richard said, sliding the heavy envelope across his desk, "you take this to the post office. Do not hand-deliver it. Send it via United States Postal Service certified mail with return receipt requested. That little green card is going to be your lethal weapon." The following morning, I stood at the counter of the local post office. I watched the postal clerk affix the green PS Form 3811 card to the back of the heavy manila envelope, stamp it with official date markers, and log the tracking number into the federal system. I paid the fees, took my receipt, and waited. 2 days later, sitting by my front window, I saw the mail carrier pull up to Mark's house. Mark was outside on his porch, holding a cup of coffee. The mail carrier walked up the steps, handed him the pen, and presented the clipboard with the green card attached. I watched through my blinds as Mark casually signed his name on the receipt, handed the pen back, and took the thick envelope. He ripped open the flap right there on his porch, pulling out the $45,000 notice and the stack of expert reports. I watched his face closely. He scanned the first page, let out a loud, mocking laugh, and shook his head. He looked across the lawn toward my house, spotted me standing near the window, and raised the papers in the air with a smug, condescending nod. He shoved the entire folder into his mailbox and strolled back inside his house as if he had just tossed out junk mail. 3 days later, my mail carrier slipped a small green postcard into my mailbox. It was the official USPS return receipt. I held it up to the afternoon light, examining Mark's bold ink signature on the front, alongside the official date and timestamp applied by the post office. I took a high-resolution photo of the card, saved it to my cloud storage, and then clipped the original green card directly to the front cover of my legal binder. He genuinely believed I was throwing a desperate, expensive bluff. He thought a 32-page legal notice was just an old woman throwing a temper tantrum on paper. What Mark didn't understand was the profound legal power of that small piece of green cardboard sitting on my desk. That signature on the receipt was immutable, federal proof that he had received formal, written notification of the severe structural damage his tree was inflicting. In the eyes of the law, he could never again claim he wasn't warned. By signing that card and choosing to completely ignore the demand notice, Mark had legally crossed the line from simple ignorance to documented intentional negligence. He had just voluntarily placed his signature on the very trap that would destroy him financially, and he didn't have a single clue. Late autumn brought 3 straight days of heavy pour-downs across our suburban county. The soil around our foundations became completely saturated, causing the willow's aggressive root network to expand rapidly. On the 3rd morning, the inevitable happened. At 6:15 a.m., a subterranean thud echoed through my floorboards, followed instantly by the sharp hiss of high-pressure water beneath my basement floor. I walked downstairs with my flashlight. The main clean water line coming into my home had severed completely where the roots pierced the PVC joint. Water was pooling rapidly across the concrete floor, and the hairline foundation crack had widened into a half-inch structural trench. Muddy water spewed through the fracture, running down the gray basement walls. I didn't panic or waste time screaming. Panicking is an expensive waste of energy. Instead, I calmly shut off the main municipal water valve to isolate the breach, returned to my kitchen, and dialed the direct line for the County Building Inspection and Code Enforcement Division. I needed an official government record of this damage immediately. Within 45 minutes, an official city vehicle pulled into my driveway. Inspector Miller, a veteran code officer with 20 years of experience in structural safety, walked onto my porch with his tablet. "Ms. Linda, I got your emergency call," Inspector Miller said. "You mentioned active foundation displacement and a pipe failure?" "That's correct," I said, leading him down to the basement. The main supply line is severed, and root pressure from my neighbor's tree has officially compromised this foundation wall. Inspector Miller illuminated the gushing crack with his flashlight, measured the gap with a digital caliper, and took photographs. He shook his head grimly. This wall is actively shifting under extreme lateral hydraulic and organic pressure. That root system is acting like a hydraulic jack. I know, I replied smoothly, and I have taken all the necessary legal steps to document this before today's structural failure. I handed him my 3-ring binder. Inspector Miller flipped through the pages, reviewing the certified arborist's radar scans, the University Botanical Lab report, the plumbing camera logs, and the engineering assessment. "You have a full forensic package here," he said, visibly impressed. "This is as thorough as any commercial litigation file I've ever seen." "Look at the front cover," I pointed out. "That is a USPS return receipt green card. My neighbor received a formal notice of property damage, complete with these expert reports and a $45,000 demand letter 3 months ago. He signed that receipt, ignored the warning, and allowed this damage to escalate into an emergency." Inspector Miller verified Mark's signature and the postal stamp date. He was officially put on notice, had full knowledge of the hazard, and chose to do nothing. This crosses straight into a severe code violation for maintaining a hazardous private nuisance. He walked outside, snapped photos of the massive weeping willow leaning over the property line, and pulled an official red violation notice out of his clipboard. "I'm logging this as an active structural hazard," Inspector Miller stated. "He is being issued an immediate municipal citation to abate the hazard. This official report will be filed into the county public registry today." As Inspector Miller walked over to slap the bright red city notice on Mark's front door, I watched from my porch. Mark came running out in his pajamas, shouting in confusion. He was finally realizing that his nightmare was no longer just an argument with an elderly teacher. It was now an official matter of public municipal record. The morning after Inspector Miller posted the red municipal violation notice on Mark's door, reality finally crashed down on my neighbor. He realized he was facing impending city fines and a massive financial liability. Panicked and looking for a quick exit, Mark did what every negligent homeowner tries to do. He called his homeowner's insurance provider to file a liability claim, attempting to dump the $45,000 repair bill onto his policy. 2 days later, a silver sedan pulled into our shared driveway. A senior claims adjuster named Greg stepped out, carrying a clipboard, a camera, and a thick folder. He spent 20 minutes inspecting the base of Mark's weeping willow before walking up my porch steps to assess the damage to my home. "Ms. Linda?" Greg asked politely, extending his hand. "I'm Greg, senior liability adjuster for Mark's homeowner's insurance carrier. Mark filed an emergency property claim, stating an unforeseen, sudden natural growth event caused damage to your driveway and underground utilities." I offered Greg a seat at my porch table. "An unforeseen accident? Is that what Mark told you?" "That is what his claim form states," Greg nodded, opening his clipboard. "If this was an unpredictable act of nature, our policy covers third-party liability claims up to $50,000. I just need to inspect your foundation and main water lines to verify the loss." "Before we walk down to the basement, Greg," I said smoothly, sliding a fresh manila envelope across the table, "you need to look at these records." Greg opened the folder. Inside was a complete set of color photos showing the buckled sidewalk, the fiber optic plumbing camera logs, the certified arborist's radar analysis, and the structural engineer's report. But right on top was a high-resolution photocopy of the USPS return receipt green card, bearing Mark's signature and an official post office date stamp from 4 months prior. Greg's eyes widened as he read the attached letter, the formal notice of property damage. His eyes fixed on the date Mark had signed his name on the green card. "He received this 4 months ago?" Greg asked, his tone shifting from routine to dead serious. He was formally served with certified engineering reports detailing active foundation damage and warning him of impending pipe failure? "Yes," I replied calmly. He signed for that letter with his own hand on June 12th. Not only did he refuse to remediate the roots or install a barrier, but he also explicitly told me that the tree had a right to grow and that I needed to adapt. He had full, documented knowledge of the hazard and chose to ignore it for over 100 days. Greg leaned back, shaking his head with a cold, professional smirk. Well, Miss Linda, Mark just made a catastrophic legal mistake. He explained the reality of insurance law to me, though I already knew it well. Standard homeowners insurance policies in the United States contain strict exclusion clauses regarding liability. Insurance covers sudden, accidental, and unpreventable events. It explicitly excludes damage resulting from intentional negligence, failure to maintain property, or turning a blind eye to a known, documented hazard after receiving formal written notice. By signing that green card 4 months ago and choosing to ignore the warning, Mark had legally stripped himself of all insurance coverage. In the eyes of his insurance company, his inaction was no longer an accident. It was documented, deliberate negligence. Our legal department will not pay a single dime for his claim, Greg said, standing up and shutting his binder. In fact, because he lied on his claim form by claiming this was an unforeseen accident, he may be facing policy cancellation for fraud. 10 minutes later, I watched from my kitchen window as Greg stood on Mark's porch, delivering the news directly to his face. Mark's jaw dropped. The smug, arrogant neighbor who had mocked my warning was now standing in his doorway, realizing he was completely uninsured and personally on the hook for $45,000 out of his own pocket. The official denial letter from Mark's insurance company arrived in his inbox 48 hours later. Deprived of insurance protection and facing a formal municipal citation from code enforcement, Mark had run out of road. My attorney, Richard, wasted no time sending a final pre-litigation settlement demand. The terms were non-negotiable. Mark had 30 days to deposit $45,000 into an escrow account to cover my repairs, plus hire a licensed tree service to completely remove the weeping willow and grind its stump below the soil line. If he refused, we would immediately file a lawsuit in County Superior Court for full damages, court costs, and statutory treble damages under state tree laws. On a crisp Monday morning, Mark knocked on my front door. The arrogant attitude that had defined him for months was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, defeated glare. He stood on my porch holding a folder, looking like a man who had spent the weekend staring at his bank account. "Linda," he began, his voice flat and strained, "I got your lawyer's demand. $45,000 is a massive amount of money. I had to pull funds directly out of my savings and take out a personal loan. Is there any way we can handle this without taking all my cash?" I stood in the doorway, looking him straight in the eyes with a calm, unyielding expression. "Mark, 4 months ago, I walked over to your driveway and gave you a polite warning. You told me to adapt and let nature take its course. Now, nature and the legal system have taken their course. Can't we just trim the branches and patch the concrete ourselves?" He tried to negotiate, his voice desperate. "I can hire someone to fix the pipes for half that price." "No," I replied firmly. "My structural engineer and licensed plumbers will handle the repairs, funded entirely by your payment. Either the full settlement amount is wired into my attorney's escrow account by Friday at noon, or Richard files the lawsuit at 1 minute past 12. He swallowed hard, realized he had zero leverage, and nodded slowly. "Fine. The money will be in your lawyer's account by Friday." By Thursday afternoon, the wire transfer cleared into Richard's escrow account. With the funds secured, my chosen contractors got straight to work. Over the following 2 weeks, a foundation crew excavated along my sidewall, reinforced the concrete with steel piers, and sealed the structural fractures with industrial epoxy. Simultaneously, a master plumbing team replaced the compromised line with heavy-duty seamless pipes and repaved my damaged walkway to perfection. Every single invoice was paid directly from Mark's settlement funds. On the final Saturday of the month, a commercial tree removal crew pulled up to Mark's driveway. 3 workers climbed into bucket trucks equipped with industrial chainsaws and wood chippers. For 5 hours, engines roared as they systematically dismantled the massive weeping willow branch by branch. I watched from my porch, as the limbs that had threatened my home were reduced to wood chips and hauled away. Finally, the main trunk was felled, and a heavy stump grinder chewed the remaining roots deep into the earth. Mark stood near his truck, watching his expensive mistake vanish into thin air, $45,000 poorer, and completely humbled. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, the work crews drove away, leaving the street completely quiet. My foundation was solid, my plumbing was brand new, and my property value was fully restored. I poured myself a tall, cold glass of sweetened iced tea with fresh lemon and walked out to my porch rocking chair. The afternoon sun washed over my lawn, highlighting the pristine concrete of my newly repaired walkway. I took a slow sip of my tea, feeling the gentle breeze, and smiled. In the end, I didn't need to yell or lose my dignity. I played the long game, stayed patient, and won.